Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Right now, one of the justices of the Supreme Court of Canada is on leave following allegations about an altercation in Arizona. Little bit of alliteration there. So this is kind of a big deal. I'm not sure I can ever think of a situation where a Supreme Court justice has been put on leave or has gone on leave about a complaint like this. So this is something that is major news. However, it wasn't initially major news. This was something that actually happened back in January, the actual altercation itself. And my understanding is that the Justice Russell Brown, has been on leave since the beginning of February, but we're just finding out about this now. And the reason why we're finding out about it now is that people started asking questions going, where's Justice Brown? We've got all these decisions. We've got basically the entire bench sitting, and then there's a note there saying that Justice Brown didn't participate. Why not? So people started asking questions about that, and it was revealed that a complaint was made about Justice Brown's behavior, and that they considered it to have at least enough merit to allow a complaint to proceed. As a result of that, Justice Brown is on leave. Now, that's not super transparent in the sense that we shouldn't have to sort of catch the Supreme Court in the act in order to say, well, what's going on here? That said, what they've said is that they didn't release this in order to protect privacy interests, and I can kind of see the argument here. One of the things that can be incredibly damaging to people is having their name released when they're accused of a crime. And even if they're acquitted, ultimately that can put a stain on people that they may never manage to clear. This is often a problem if you're in, if the allegations themselves are particularly, shocking or horrifying. People who are accused of serious crimes and are later cleared may never manage to clear their name in any sort of realistic way. Every time they apply for work, people go, I'm not so sure about that. It also applies if you're in a position that requires sort of a high degree of trust and confidence, like, say, Supreme Court Justice. So I'm kind of two minds on this one. I don't think I've really settled on what the right course of action was on that. That said, we now have these allegations. They're now in the public eye. A bunch of different statements have been made, and so now we're starting to learn a little bit more about what happened. And I should note, this is a bit of a dangerous topic for me as a lawyer to venture into, because we're talking about a Supreme Court justice. And I've appeared in front of the Supreme Court before. I would like to again. So I'm going to be very careful to be delicate here and to be fair, but I'm not going to sort of pull any punches if I see that there's a place where there's an issue. So I'm going to try to be fair to this issue. I should also note, just in the interests of full disclosure, Justice Brown taught my first year torts class. So I've actually had a class with him, although, that's not, I don't think that means a whole lot, but I thought I'd mention. So what is the allegation here? Well, there was an event. Justice Brown was an attendee at that event, and afterwards, he's off getting drinks. He's apparently invited to join a table with some other people. And these are points that everyone is kind of in agreement on. And there's another individual, a Mr. Crump, who at the time that Justice Brown was invited over, he was not there. And later he returns to the table, and from all indications, he's not super happy to see this new person at the table. Mr. Crump, in a statement, describes some behavior that you might call boorish. He says that Justice Brown is boasting about his importance. He's reading from his speech. And I don't really know what to make of this part, because we've all encountered people who have too much ego and are unpleasant to deal with. That might be the case. The other thing is that we've also encountered people who have too much ego and need to be the biggest person in the room. And it could be that Mr. Crump is upset because now there's a guy who's got accomplishments to talk about, and now he's kind of feeling a little envious or jealous. I can't say which of those is the case, or maybe a mix of them, or maybe something else entirely. But at this stage, we're not talking about anything that could ground a complaint. But it doesn't stop here. So eventually the group is kind of breaking up, they're leaving, and they're heading back towards their room. And apparently, Justice Brown was following along with them, and it's unclear as to what's going on here in terms of the behavior described, because what's noted here is that Justice Brown is described as being creepy, primarily by Mr. Crump. Now, I don't know what creepy means here. There's all sorts of possibilities, and I think that it's actually worth investigating what behaviors ground that. Because, are we talking about aggressive behavior? Are we talking about just social miscues? I don't know. And that is something we have very little information about. And that, I think, is actually kind of the bigger issue on this one. But the one that's getting all the airplay is over a physical confrontation that happens between Mr. Crump and Justice Brown. So we'll talk about that as well. And given that we're talking about a physical altercation, I'm going to look at this a bit through my defense lawyer lens. And you might say, well, why not look at it through a prosecutor lens? And really, they're the same lens, because both a defense lawyer and a prosecutor, if they're any good at their jobs, are looking at a case for weaknesses, in the sense that that's really what defines a case. You're going to look for inconsistencies. You're going to look for things that don't make sense, and just to see how strong it is. So Crump gives an account to the media, and it's really worth looking at these accounts in some detail here, because Justice Brown also gives an account, and it differs in some substantial ways. But Mr. Crump says, I told him, you're clearly intoxicated and the girls are creeped out by you. He shoved me, I pushed him back, then punched him in the face twice, and he fell to the ground. So you'll note here that what he's telling the media is that Justice Brown initiated force. And I also have some questions about where this takes place, because, he's described as following them back to their room. Well, is this happening to prevent somebody from entering the hotel room, or is this happening in a hallway? That to me is a very important distinction. But again, we'll come back to this, because he says, I told him, you're clearly intoxicated and the girls are creeped out by you. He shoved me, I pushed him back, then punched him in the face twice, and he fell to the ground. All right. Now, we also have some body cam footage that's been released of Mr. Crump in his initial interactions with the police. So let's watch that here.
Hey, are you who called us?
Yeah, I was the one who called.
How can I help you?
So some guy was trying to roll up on the girls that I was with, followed us back from the bar, back to the room. I told him, you're not following us. Basically, he tried to get around me. I said, you're not following the girls to the room at all. I shoved him. He came back at me, kind of fought him a little bit. He ripped my shirt, and then hotel staff helped him back to his room.
So you notice how those stories have changed in the retelling, because when he's talking to the police, he says he tries to get around me, I shove him, and then we have an altercation where he's very vague, leaving out the whole punching him in the face repeatedly. Whereas when he's talking to the media later, he says, he shoved me, I pushed him back. The story's changed, and if you're a defense lawyer representing Justice Brown, at this point, you're feeling pretty good, because this is the kind of thing that is great for cross-examination. This guy's story is changing in some pretty significant ways, like who initiates force. So I think this story's got some interesting problems to it. And we also have some reports from the officer who wrote down that Mr. Crump was argumentative, hostile, and appeared to be under the influence of alcohol. So it's difficult to say what's going on here. Ultimately, I think that if this was a criminal trial against Justice Brown for the assault, based on the little bit we have right now, I'd be thinking that Justice Brown is in pretty good shape. And if I was a prosecutor, I might be deciding, do I really feel like this is one I want to run with or not? Now, another thing that is worth noting, and lots of people, I frequently say, don't talk to the police, and there's lots of people, there's always somebody in the comments going, well, why not? I mean, couldn't it be a great idea sometimes? Well, I'm just going to note that a Supreme Court justice on the Canadian court declined to provide a statement to the police. The police apparently tried to reach him to conduct an interview and were not able to get an interview. Well, let's face it, he's staying in a hotel room. It's not that they couldn't find him or anything like that. It's that he decided not to do it. And awesome, because that's the right call. And some people have said that that suggests that he's guilty of something. I don't think anything of the sort. Everyone's got a right not to do a stupid thing by talking to the police, and you should exercise that right. So no problems with that. Ultimately, this is going to be an interesting matter because fundamentally, I think that the place to look at here, if there's an issue, is going to be investigating what creepy means here. What does that actually mean? What was actually happening in that sense? The actual fight itself, if you find that Justice Brown was doing something wrong with the creepy, then okay, maybe that's a bigger issue. But if you find that he's not doing something wrong with that, then maybe the issue is that, maybe they should have pursued charges against Crump. It's really hard to say here. But I don't make a whole lot out of the fight itself, especially given the conflicting testimony or the conflicting accounts that we already have from Mr. Crump. Justice Brown has said that Mr. Crump's story is basically a work of complete fiction. He says that that in an apparent attempt to avoid facing the consequences of assaulting me, that Mr. Crump had called the police and falsely described him as the instigator. Justice Brown basically says that he got punched out of the blue a couple of times. He wasn't able to defend himself, and it's hard to say at this stage what's going on, especially because this is really two people are each going to have a conflicting account. Hard to say. I don't see that a conviction here would be likely on any sort of assault charge, as I mentioned. Now, one other thing I want to address, because I've seen some people raise this in part of their commentary, is they've said, even if he's cleared, wouldn't this create a conflict of interest? Because if he's dealing with cases around assaults or other sorts of allegations, maybe it'll influence him if he somehow, this whole experience of having dealt with police and so forth, maybe that'll influence him. And I say, I don't see a problem with that. In fact, it might, and I'm being really cynical here, it might actually be a good thing to have somebody on the Supreme Court of Canada who, if we assume that he's been falsely accused here, and if he's been correctly accused, then he'd probably get removed. But if he was falsely accused, then I kind of think it would be a good idea to have somebody who's had that experience on the Supreme Court of Canada, because the Supreme Court is typically made up of people who don't have a lot of negative police interactions. It's typically made up of people whose experience with police has always been helpful and friendly, and that they're people who can rely on, but that's not a universal experience. And I think it's, given that the Supreme Court, one of the things that they're often tasked to do is to evaluate police powers and to evaluate questions like, what if they didn't do it? It's maybe useful to have somebody on the Supreme Court who has the experience of having, a false allegation made against them, because fundamentally, we've got the presumption of innocence there. People who say that this is a conflict really don't consider that it's equally a conflict if you only have people who've been there from sort of wealthy and relatively privileged backgrounds who have not ever had, a hostile interaction with the police, and certainly aren't about to have a hostile interaction with the police after they're on the Supreme Court. I don't see the issue with that. So on balance, what I really want to know more about in terms of this complaint is, what are the allegations about his behavior with respect to the women? Because that's, to me, the bigger concern, and that's the one that is not being talked about at all in any of these reports. It seems like they're really focusing on the wrong aspect of the story. So I'd like to know more about that. We'll just have to see. I'm going to follow this as it goes. But right now, it's also important to remember we have a presumption of innocence in criminal things for a reason. and we should hold off on judgment. I've seen a lot of people calling for, this response or that response. How about we call for, let's investigate this and see what's happening and, and what is with this? Because I feel that it's important that we have a due process here. And in fact, a lot of the calls from the court have been, let's see the process sort of work itself through. That doesn't mean it's not, it's not appropriate to sort of look into this and have, you can have opinions and so forth, but let's maybe call off the whole rush to punishment and rush to judgment on this one and wait to see what's going on. As mentioned, real concerns about Mr. Crump and his testimony on that, and I think that ultimately he's likely to be the least useful witness that they could talk to here. So yeah, lots of people have wanted my comments on that. I hope I've been able to approach it with a little bit of fairness, but ultimately, I guess, let me know in the comments below what you think. It's a delicate subject. It's a difficult subject. And I can't say that I have all the answers, because at this stage, we don't even have enough information to know all the questions, really. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you found this to be interesting or educational. Really, I kind of wanted to shine a light on the fact that Mr. Crump seems to be giving different stories at different times. That to me is a really big problem on this one. But yeah, let me know. Please like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to see more content. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, leave them in the comments below. All of those things help the channel and are much appreciated. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level, the CCFR, David Michaud, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Jane Babe and Luxor. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Kyle Fox, Haywire, Gerald to the Bailey, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsage, and Vicky. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.